to What the Fuck Just Happened. I'm your host, Liz Enton. If you listen to the intro, you know my story. If not, here's a brief summary. I'm a sciencey skeptic, and when my dad died, I took a shot in the dark and decided to investigate if there was any possible evidence of an afterlife. I assumed that was as realistic as Santa Claus, but I was desperate. However, I was so blown away by what I discovered that I wrote a book and launched this podcast. In this podcast, I will be talking to some fairly normal people about some really weird shit. I speak with everyone from psychic mediums and afterlife researchers to ordinary people who've had some inexplicable experiences. So come, listen. There's no need to draw any final conclusions. Keep an open mind and wonder, what the fuck just happened? Hi guys, so I am here talking to Renee Buck. She is one of the certified mediums with Forever Family Foundation and one of my friends and one of the first mediums I met in the middle of all this research in, I guess it was 2016. Was it 2016 or 2017? 2016, how could I forget, right after the lovely, lovely election. So
right. Yes, it was right after the election.
So we commiserated in
Florida.
In Florida at a Forever Family weekend before we, of course, even had any idea things would come to the level of disaster and the whole country would be quarantined.
Right. So much has happened since then. It's kind of remarkable. And not a lot of good things, yeah, in my opinion, anyway.
So along with being friends with Renee, I've had a lot of really interesting experiences. Not only did I meet her that weekend, and very early on where she very patiently let me ask her question after question, I also did a past life regression with her, and I took a class for beginners to learn mediumship skills. I mean, how do you even know you had abilities? What were some of the first experiences you had that made you think you did have abilities?
I never went into this believing that I had abilities. I was in search of answers to prophetic dreams that I was having. It was suggested to me that there might be someone at the Spiritualist church who could answer my questions about my dreams.
And the Spiritualist church is kind of organizing mediumship through the culture and community of a religion, and it doesn't require a god. Or
the way that spiritualists define spiritualism is that it is a science, a philosophy, and a religion all in one. There is a belief in God, although I would say it's more similar to a universalist approach in that all of the masters are accepted as equal, that our teaching can come from anyone and anywhere in the world and in the history of the world. And so it's very open. But the one thing that spiritualism does is it adds the components and the belief that, mediumship is a divine attribute that all of us possess, that we can communicate directly with spirit. We don't need to have a go-between if we want to develop our own abilities to communicate with our loved ones, with our guides, with God. And also the belief in energy healing. So that's what really makes spiritualism stand apart, is mediumship and energy healing, and just this openness to all forms of spiritual teaching.
Okay. I hadn't known much about it from like the spiritualist perspective. So then, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut off your story. So go back. So you were having prophetic dreams. I think me and probably our viewers or listeners, podcast, would love to know an example of one of those dreams, if you're comfortable sharing.
Sure. So these dreams started for me when I was around my late 20s, I guess, or mid-20s maybe. And they were dreams that I would have about myself, although they were prophetic. In other words, the reality would catch up to the dream at some number of years later. So, for example, the first prophetic dream that I recall, that I actually recorded in my diary, it was my first night in Tokyo. I was in Japan on a 1-year program, and I was headed to Okinawa to teach in the school system there. But we had our orientation in Tokyo, and that night I had a dream that I was in this small office. So in this particular dream, it was my first night in Tokyo. I was there for an orientation. I was going to be an English teacher in Okinawa for the year. But this dream was of me in a small office. I was there with like 4 or 5 other people, and then there were 2 people standing in the doorway, and they were talking to us, and we were all listening. And anyway, I woke up from that dream curious because it was so vivid. It was like watching a movie, but I didn't know anybody in the dream. They were all strangers to me, but it stuck with me, and I wrote about it because I have a dream journal, and I like to record my dreams. And 2 years later, this dream actually came true. In between then, I had done my year in Japan, and I had gone back to the U.S. to do my master's in teaching English as a second language, and returned to Japan, but this time to the mountains to work for Seiko Epson as an English teacher in their corporate program. And it was during this very first week that this scene played out. I was in this little room, the teacher's room, and the 2 administrators of the program were standing in the doorway, having just come from a meeting with the management, and were reporting back. And when that happened, the hair on the back of my neck just stood up, and I was like, oh my goodness, this is the dream. These are the people.
So to clarify, it was the exact same people in the exact same space.
Yeah.
It matched. Like, you even recognized the people exactly.
Yeah. I realized that, oh my gosh, this is it. So that was like 2.5 years later, probably. And that very same thing happened prior to me going to business school. I had applied to schools all over the place, and I was waiting to hear, and then I had a dream of myself in a classroom in a lecture hall. And there was a professor there who had suspenders and blonde hair, and behind him was a wall of equations. Not a wall, but I should say that the chalkboard, it was like a wide chalkboard. It was filled with equations, and there was a kid that was asking a question. And so I told the woman that I was working with at the time, again, this was in Japan. I wasn't teaching at that point. I was the head of a publishing group at a securities house. I told her about my dream, and she knew of my prophetic dreams, and she said, oh, that must mean you got in, that you're going to go to grad school somewhere. And indeed, that was the very scene, probably about a week or 2 into my MBA program at MIT. I was like, oh my gosh, this is it. And there's the guy asking the question, and there's the economics professor. And I actually, at the last reunion, I went up to that student, Dorian, and I told him, I said, I had a dream about you a year before I met you. And he's like, what? So that was kind of funny. But so these dreams, what was interesting about
I just have to say how crazy and fascinating and mind-blowing that is. It changes our whole definition of time. And
right. And who's communicating that? Like, how is this coming to me? That was the big question. And of course, the question of predestiny versus free will, right? When we have prophetic dreams, does that mean that everything before us is already determined, or that we have all of these choices, and depending on the path that we go down, those are the dreams that I remember, right? That come true. That was a curious thing. In those dreams, the time between the dream and the event, the actual event, got shorter and shorter over time until it was happening simultaneously.
What do you mean simultaneously? Like the night before an event would happen, or?
No, while it was happening in another place.
I don't know what you mean by saying that.
So I was in Europe, and I was having a dream about events that were unfolding back in Massachusetts in my home that impacted me. And, so it was the middle of the night for me, right? And I woke up going, wait, is that true? Could that be true? In the second dream, a person appeared who I learned later is actually my primary spirit guide, Brown Bear. So he appeared in my dream, basically saying, "Don't worry, I'm here."
So interesting. And you interpret it as spirit. It could be interpreted 10 ways from you. Remote viewing and physically, which is when someone physically, which also is backed up by evidence, goes and views supposedly out of their body or their consciousness or whatever. I mean, we could have a whole other 10-hour conversation on what exactly remote viewing is, but they go witness a scene that is not physically occurring in front of them. It could be psychically knowing. It could be predicting the future, or I guess what makes you, so you say it's spirit. I'd like to know why you picked that interpretation.
You're right. It could have been anything, right? And I didn't know. I fell asleep again, and it was in the second dream that this other person shows up, this other man that I did not know. He had long black hair, and it was in a ponytail, and he was dressed very sharply, very smartly. He had a black mock turtleneck on and a green blazer and slacks, and just really classy and handsome. He said to me he wasn't going anywhere. He was in my house in the dream.
I would just be like, what the fuck? Like, what is going on? Especially if this was happening so many times. I mean, I guess maybe, were you just shocked?
Yeah, I wanted to know, like, how am I getting this information? Why am I getting this information? And now it's like real time. It was the first time it had happened.
Did you ever meet or find out who this man you didn't recognize in the dream was?
I did. So what happened from that point is I did go to the church. So it was either the first or second time that I went to the church that a message from my brother came through, and that was the first message from a medium I'd ever had.
And your brother had passed away?
Yes, he passed away when I was 12, and he was 14. So, and that was a remarkable reading. I was shocked, but the details were so, like, it was just undeniable that it was him. She described him exactly, his crazy curly hair and the color of the motorcycle, his his blue motorcycle that he died on, and the mysterious events sort of surrounding that accident, and just so many things. And
just to also clarify, was this a medium you'd booked a private session with, and she had your name and full name?
No.
Or was it? Okay.
No, this was in the church service.
Where they were reading to a group.
Yes. So the congregation, at the end of a spiritualist church service, the last 20 to 25 minutes of the hour and a half service is dedicated to messages from spirit. And so the message medium will bring short messages from spirit out to people in the congregation. So this is a woman I'd never laid eyes on before, nor had she me.
Didn't have your full name or your identity. And this is also before social media, right, where she could have looked up profiles and recognized you.
Oh, yeah, exactly. Oh, yeah, no, we had no communication at all. What was interesting is that she, I was already in 40. I think I just turned 40 or 41 maybe at that point. When I raised my hand after she was describing my brother, the way that she was describing indirectly, the spirit who had come through indirectly, teenage boy, how he died, and a number of things about him, and so I raised my hand because it fit me, and I would think I was the last one. Once it got to the blue motorbike, I was the last one with my hand up, and she looked at me and she said, "Oh, he's telling me he's your brother." That was the clincher, because for a 40-year-old to have a 14-year-old brother is pretty much not unheard of. It could be stepbrother or something, but
so he passed years ago, and she was bringing him in.
Many years ago, right.
And you were a teenager too, or younger than he was older brother, so you must have been about 12.
He was 14 and I was 12, yeah.
And she's bringing it in all these years later. Wow.
Exactly. If she weren't tapping in, she would have said, "Oh, this is your son," right? Just because of the age difference. But she said, "Oh, he's your brother. He's telling me he's your brother." And then she had a message for my mother that I didn't really understand, and in fact didn't even think was true, which was that, my mother felt a lot of guilt about the accident. And I spoke to Nancy after that. I went and
Nancy was the medium.
She was the medium, yep. Her name was Nancy Strickland. I said, I understood all of it except for that part about my mom. I didn't think that she felt guilty about it because she didn't have anything to do with the accident. And Nancy said, "Well, talk to your mom and see what she says. So I called my mom, and immediately my mother began to cry. And she said, I did feel guilty. And I said, why? She said, well, because I fought your dad and your brother on the decision to buy that motorbike for his birthday, because my brother's name was Merle. She said Merle was so accident prone that I just did not have a good feeling about it. And my mother was quite psychic. She picked up on a lot of things. She said I had a very bad feeling about it. And I said, no. And I finally gave in. And 2 weeks later, he was dead. And so she carried that burden her whole life. And the message from my brother was for my mom to let go of that it was his chosen time to go. He had accomplished what he needed to accomplish, even at 14 years of age. And that it was, had nothing to do with her. She did what she was meant to do, which was to allow him to get the motorbike. So that allowed her to heal in a very profound way. And that completely changed my whole idea of mediumship and its purpose. That healing that I felt in that connection to him, but also that my mother felt in being somewhat released from the burden of guilt that she'd carried for not quite 30 years, 20-some years at that point. That was kind of remarkable. And so then I went back to Nancy the next week, and I told her that, well, you know what? That did validate. So then she started asking me why I was coming to the church, and I told her about my dreams, that I was having these prophetic dreams that were coming true, and I was trying to understand who was communicating with me. And so she asked me if I was interested in developing, my abilities and bringing what I was receiving subconsciously into consciousness. And I said, I'm not really sure what you mean. And she said, well, mediumship. Are you interested in developing your abilities as a medium? And I said, I don't think I can be a medium. I've never done anything like that. I mean, you're the first message I ever received from a medium. And she said, why don't you come and try? I have a circle at my house every Thursday night. If you enjoy it, I ask you to be dedicated to it and to come every Thursday, because it's the consistency of the circle that makes it possible for people to develop their abilities. And I'm like, yeah, sure, I'll try. So I did, and I amazingly to myself was able to bring through information that was evidential to people in the circle. So I continued there for 5 years. And now your question back to, so who was that guy in my second dream? In circle, one night, Nancy brought him through. She described him exactly. And she said, this is your spirit guide, Renee. His name is Brown
And you had not described him to her when you had your conversation about the dreams, or had you?
No, not in terms of what he looked like. I just said, and then there was another guy that came through, and I didn't know who he was.
Oh, okay. So she could have said anything, like, oh, that's the guy you'll meet in 5 years. So you didn't describe him. You didn't really say the details. No, not at all. I was mostly focused on the first dream of what had come true, right? Like, why was that coming true? Than I was on the second dream. So when that happened, I was like, oh my gosh, that's why he's saying he's going to be sticking around because he's my guide. Like, he's here, right? He's my guide. And what is a guide exactly? A spirit guide? A spirit guide, we all have a band of guides, actually. And these are spirits who have agreed before we were back in earthly bodies again to guide us, to help us remember the life plan that we put together for ourselves and that they presumably helped us with. They're our spiritual mentors, I guess, and guides. They know our life plan. They know our goals. They know what we want to accomplish. They know who we're supposed to meet in this lifetime and the things that we're meant to do. And they urge us, nudge us, cajole us toward those goals through, in many ways. And I'm still understanding all of those ways. But one way for sure is that I know that they amplify those gut feelings that we have about our choices, whether it's choosing a person to be in our lives or a class to take or a job to take or a place to move or whatever. Like, those gut feelings that we have
are amplified by our guides, and helps us stay on our path.
And are these guides, are they people who lived before? Would they be like a great grandparent, or were they always guides? Like, what are they?
Good question. Both. Once we're on the other side, where our spirits all gather back together, if we're of a high enough level, I don't know if level's the right word, but a high enough maybe level of spiritual evolution, we can raise our hands to be guides. Now, sometimes those guides may have had lifetimes with us on Earth or possibly other places, or they may have remained on the other side and act as our teachers. So what I do understand about Brown Bear is that he and I had one lifetime together back in like the 1500s or so in the Andes Mountains. We were indigenous people there, and both died quite young from viruses brought over by Europeans. So we had a short life together back then, but we have been very close in our lifetimes on the other side. And so he is my primary guide. I call him my 24/7 guide, or my personal guide in this lifetime.
And how do you know that you had that life experience with him?
How do I know that? That is a good question. I think the first way that came through, when I was first developing, I was trying a lot of different modes of communication, and one of the things that I was experimenting with was automatic writing.
And that is, can you explain to everyone what automatic writing is? It's something I want to try, and I've never tried it. It seems so interesting.
I would just caution anyone who wants to try it to do it with a group of people around you, just to keep the energy high. So automatic writing, the way that works is that you go into a meditation, you're tapping into spirit, you're inviting, spirit and the light to work with you and to work through you. You have a pen in hand and something to write on.
Does it have to be a pen and paper? Can you write on your phone or computer?
Yeah, of course. I mean, any writing utensil, it may even work better.
Is if it's like spirit from the other side coming in while you're automatic writing, I sometimes wondered, and this is just completely philosophical, there's no evidence for this, but if a pen and paper, a more old-fashioned form would be better, because if you want people to come in who lived before, that might be a form, someone, maybe if you want to talk to your great-grandfather, they're probably more comfortable on a pen and paper than on your smartphone.
That is a good question.
That's an experiment. I'm in quarantine. I've got some time. Maybe I'll give both a try. I'll order some pens and paper online, and there's an experiment. I'm going to go try and see if it matters what technology. If people, different people who've passed away, if maybe people passed away younger and more recently, come in more with my phone. But again, I mean, it'd be a big experiment having to prove that they were even real, because one issue is now that I've thought this, I could subconsciously create characters that back up this theory. So, I mean, it would be a really fun, probably not anywhere close to flawless experiment. But okay, so sorry, back to explaining automatic writing. Right.
So I think just to answer that one doubt that lingers in your mind about, is it just my subconscious or whatever, it's the evidence is in the information that is brought through. So especially if it's third-party information that you can look up and you realize, oh yeah, well, that is true, right? Then you know that it's coming from somewhere else, right?
Like public records, like you get details about a person who died, and then you go to a public records bureau and find out their name and date, birth and death match. So going back to explaining to everyone what automatic writing exactly is.
Right. So basically you're in a meditation, you've invited, spirit and the light in, you've got light all around you, you have your hand holding the pen or pencil to paper, and you're just waiting. Your hand may not feel like it wants to move, but if it does, if you feel energy in your arm that wants to move, initially what happens is you just get a lot of scrolling and circles, and it's messy. It's not anything, as spirit sort of gets used to moving your hand. And then you will see words starting to form, but it's hard. I think it's hard for spirit to pick the pen or pencil up off the paper And so the words kind of run together. And then you have to sort of bring your hand back, almost like a typewriter. You have to bring your hand back to the beginning of the next line, and then they'll continue, writing. But the words all come together. So yeah, it's very interesting. And that it was through an exercise like that Brown Bear, I was asking him a question about how we knew each other. And he talked about, this early life. And there was something in it, and I don't remember, I've got those pages here somewhere, but there was something in that I actually had to go look up about the location and, the mountains and what country they were in, because I didn't know. He told me, but I didn't know that. I'm like, well, that's a good thing to go check. And I went to check, and it was true. I'm like, oh, well, good. That's a little nice piece of evidence, because it's information that I personally, as Renee, did not know. So that's how I came to know who Brown Bear was and how long I had known him. Quite a long time. In Earth years, quite a long time. Of course, on the other side, there's sense of time. I don't know what that feels like on the other side when there's no sense of time.
You've talked about getting signs from your loved ones, like the marble story I thought was amazing. I don't know if that'd be something you'd be comfortable sharing here. You can also read a lot more about some of the amazing signs Renee gets on her blog, which I will post in the show notes. But So a sign is something where you get communication from somebody on the other side. I mean, of course, it needs investigation, and it's definitely still speculative, but it's still, signs is something that I've studied some in my research, as well as gotten some of my own. So can you describe maybe the marble sign, or a sign that you got that was just blew you away?
Yeah, I'll be happy to talk about marbles. By the way, marbles, when people are searching for the spiritual significance of marbles, that is the number one way that they find me, and from all over the world. So I don't know what's happening or why it's marbles that Spirit is literally dropping out of thin air sometimes into people's homes or in their past. They are becoming universally understood as a sign from Spirit, sort of like pennies from heaven. Well, now it's marbles.
Interesting. And to be honest, I could take marbles more seriously than pennies, I guess, because
they're unusual.
They're much more unusual. Everyone drops pennies, and you can easily find them. It's kind of like, although I do personally have an interesting feather story, which maybe will come up in a later podcast, but it's definitely in my book. But it's kind of like when people say, oh, there's feathers, I got a feather, and there's in a town where there's a lot of birds. That's kind of how I attribute pennies. I just don't give them a lot of, not to take away anyone's emotional validity. They might have very strong emotional validity, but if we're going to go just pure science, which I try to do, and remove hope and wish and emotion, overall, usually when I hear pennies or feathers, I have a hard time taking it from a scientific perspective seriously. So, but marbles, who has marbles?
So this is going back to probably 2010, right around there. Anyway, so I had a circle at my house. So a circle means a gathering of people who are mediums and those who are interested in just receiving messages. I can't remember if this was just my weekly development circle, or if it was a special event. Oftentimes, like on Valentine's Day or special days, I would have a party and we would have a circle because it's very fun. It's very fun to do that, especially on a special day like that. In the circle was a woman named Phyllis Brown, who was a really amazing medium. She was, I had met her at the Spiritualist Church, and she and her husband sat in mediumship classes with me. And anyway, so she was at the circle, and she, of course, knew about my brother, because most people, if you're going to the church week after week, they sort of know your people. And so it was no test of spirit that she was bringing my brother through. But what she said and what happened afterward was the true test of spirit, and it was remarkable. So she said to me, your brother is bringing you a bowl of marbles, and he's saying jokingly that you're, getting your marbles together. And I was like, oh, thanks, Merle, ha-ha, funny. And I don't remember the rest of the reading, but I did say, well, I don't have any marbles. I don't have a bowl of marbles at all, but I'll take the message as, basically getting my marbles together. The next week, I was down in my laundry room, and I had a pink carpet on the floor down there. Right in the middle of the pink carpet was this blue and white marble. And I was like, oh my gosh.
And is this in a house or in an apartment building with other tenants?
No, this is in a house. I had a 3-story house plus basement. So there was a 6-bedroom. It was a big old house.
So you didn't share the laundry room with other people the way you would in, say, an apartment building, or?
I did share with 2 tenants, and they'll be in the story. So I see this marble. I'm like, oh, that's cool. But it was an antique marble. You could tell it was kind of a little bit uneven, on the edges, but it was really pretty. So I'm like, okay, cool. I got my marble. I put it in my pocket. I at that point I had a smartphone, so I texted, and I guess I emailed Phyllis and said, oh, I found a marble. I just wanted to let you know. I've never seen a marble in my house before, but there was one. And then a week went by, and I was downstairs doing laundry again, and there was that blue and white marble on the pink rug again. And I'm like, oh, that must have fallen out of my jeans, because I just put, my jeans and some stuff in the washing machine. So I picked it up and I stuck it in my pocket again. And later in the day, I was upstairs in my bedroom, and I saw a blue and white marble on the top of my dresser. I'm like, wait a minute. And I put my hand in my pocket and I pulled out the other one. I'm like, oh my gosh, there's 2 blue and white marbles. That's crazy. So then over the course of the next weeks, I guess, I was finding marbles in every corner of my basement. And I have vacuumed that basement like corner to corner, like at least every 6 months. This is like those kind of scary old basements, right? That had concrete floors and stone walls and whatnot. But it was really unusual. Like I in one case, I stepped on the marble and it went spinning across the floor. And I'm like, what is that? And of course, it was a marble. In another case, a piece of the plaster from the ceiling had fallen in the corner, and I was scooping it up, and there was something shiny in there, and it was a marble. So I'm like, it's so crazy. I'm finding all these marbles. So when I went home at Christmas time, I had 5 marbles, and I brought them home to show my family and tell the story, and everybody was really excited. So I came back from Christmas, and I went down into the basement again, and there in another room, all these marbles were in all different rooms of the basement, right? So in another room on a counter were 4 marbles sitting together. And again, these were all antique marbles. I'm like, well, that's so crazy. And I knew that my tenant, Chris, had been moving his boxes around in that room. There was pallets in that room, and they were storing boxes. I was like, okay, so maybe Chris knows something about these marbles. So I went upstairs, and I showed them to Chris, and I said, did you put these marbles in the basement? And he's like, what? No. And there was another tenant there. And so I went and I called him, and I said, okay, these marbles that I'm finding in the basement, do you have anything to do with them? And they're like, no, I've never seen them before. And there had been anybody else in the house. So now I put them all together, and I had a bowl of marbles, all within probably a month of the message from Phyllis.
That is so crazy. And I can verify, I've seen that bowl of marbles at your place. So it's there. Is there any normal means explanation that makes sense? I mean, was Phyllis, could she have snuck into your house and started dropping marbles?
No, that's the crazy thing. I mean, usually I will have contractors coming in and out, but where would they be getting marbles, and why would they be dropping them? But during that time period, the only people in the house were the 3 of us, my 2 tenants and myself. And they had never seen those marbles before and found it all very curious themselves. And of course, because they knew that I was a medium, and they were both a little, I wouldn't say freaked out by it, but, they found the basement a scary place anyway. So the thought of spirits running around dropping marbles in the basement made them both a little more jittery. Well, I think what's especially remarkable, if you go and to my website and you read the story, you know, Marbles from Merle, if you read the comments down below of people from all over the world who have told their marble stories, it's amazing. I actually did do a second post, and I included a few of those amazing stories. In a number of cases, like, people actually heard the marble drop out of thin air and then roll across the floor to them from nowhere. There was one woman who contacted me, and because this was happening, she was finding all these marbles, and she really believed that it was her father in spirit. But when she told her best friend said, "Oh no, this is something evil, and you should have, you know, a priest come and perform some exorcism rites." And so it scared her. So she started Googling, and she found me, and she said, "How can I know if this is my father?" And I said, "Well, tell your father that you just want one more marble to prove that it's him, and then no more, and then see what happens." Because they were all coming fairly quickly, you know, one after the other. So she did. She said that out loud to him. She said, "Okay, one more marble, Dad, so I know it's you, and then no more." And so she wrote me, and she's like, "Well, I got one more marble." And I said, "Okay, give it a month, and then write me again." And she wrote me a month later. She's like, "No more marbles." We can communicate with spirit. We can use these signs and say, "I would love this sign, this particular sign from you." Give them a time limit or have it attach some significance to that sign. We can communicate with spirit in physical ways like that and, you know, see how well it works. I can't always promise that it will, but that's what I do.
That marble story, though, it's just crazy. Why do you think, I don't know if you'd have any insight into this. Why do you think marbles? Is there something in the material?
I don't know. I've pondered that. You know, a lot of marbles can capture and hold light, but not all of them. Some are opaque. Honestly, I don't know what it is about marbles. And I find it interesting that people are coming to that conclusion on their own, like even before they read. It's what drives them. Like they are expecting or assuming that it might be tied to someone they love in spirit because of where the marbles keep showing up. Like there was one woman who wrote and said, "You know, I keep finding marbles outside the window of my daughter's bedroom, and she died in that bedroom. She had been very sick, and it was a hospice situation, but she kept finding marbles outside that bedroom." The window, like outside in the dirt. And she would find it when she was gardening, right? So she was like, "Oh, maybe this is from my daughter." It's just very interesting, yeah.
It's just weird. It needs so much more investigation. I don't know. I guess you can't go back and do this, but I almost wish you could go back and set up a video camera at that time or a phone and just see, like, how are they showing up? I mean,
how are they showing up? Yeah.
Hindsight.
And after that, you know, after I got those marbles, after I had my bowl, I didn't find another one in the house. Like for years, I was there for another 3 years or so. There was not one more marble found.
Was there a specific period of time? Was it like you found them over a month? Was this over like?
Yeah, it was over like. I have to go back to my blog post again, but I think it was over the course of like 2 months max. I would say it was before Christmas and then shortly after. And it was done. I put them in my little bowl, or it was a cup, I guess, and that was my bowl.
Did you ever count how many? Are they a significant amount, like 14? I guess, look, you know, we're all past at 14. Anything like that? Or
I asked Phyllis, actually, or she asked me actually how many, or I can't remember how it happened. But anyway, her interpretation was that it was the number of people in my family. That's what she was picking up. And I said, "Well, there seems to be one extra." She said, "Well, I don't know. Maybe that's your higher self. I don't know." Well, I learned after that I had another brother. So it did fit.
And so how many marbles were there? Because family could be expanded. Does it start bringing in in-laws and cousins? Or just
No, it was just my immediate family. So there were 9 marbles. And at the time, there were only 8 people in my family. But then we learned that we had...
Wait, your parents had 7 kids? 6
yeah,
kids?
Well, I grew up with 6 kids in our family, and then we learned that we had another brother after that. So my mother, yes, actually gave birth to 7 children. So yeah, so then the number of marbles represented each one of us.
There was one for each kid, including a brother you didn't know at that point existed, and your parents.
Yes. Yeah, very interesting.
And it's interesting that Phyllis would say, you know, that she kind of would even think of that. And then there's something I think a little evidential that then there's this extra one that ends up being a lost brother.
Right, yeah. Because she was sort of, you know, she's like, well, I don't know why there's that extra one. It could be your higher self, but I don't know. And then we just sort of left it at that. And I'm like, oh, we don't know. And then, and it was a year or two later that I learned about my other brother, who's now a integral part of our family. Yeah, spirit works in mysterious ways, that's for sure. But it's quite exciting when you have a physical sign like that.
This is the end of part 1 of my conversation with psychic medium Renee Buck. Come back next episode for part 2, where we discuss past life regressions, what happens when someone transgender has passed away and comes through in a reading. How do they communicate to Renee what their gender is? What does giving a reading feel like? What are some of the most evidential readings she has ever given? And I also ask her some pretty awkward questions, so you don't want to miss out. To learn more about Renee, follow her blog, or book a reading, go to whispersfromthelight.com. To get more information on what the fuck just happened, to get updates on when the book launches, download Grief Bingo, and more, go to WTFJustHappened.net, check us out, and subscribe to our newsletter. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate and review us wherever you get your podcasts. It makes such a difference, especially for a new podcast like this one. And if you've had any crazy what the fucks yourself, have any questions, feedback, or just want to say hi, reach out either on Instagram at WTF_just_happened_, or email me at hello@WTFJustHappened.net. And remember, you don't have to draw any final conclusions as you wonder, what the fuck just happened?